Good evening. My name's Emily Butler. I'm the curator of the Conversations program. Thank you all so much for being with us today. I'm excited to hear in this panel about how artists have come to consider fragile ecosystems, including those here in Florida, and how artists are tackling their representation. I'm so thrilled that we are joined by three artists, Duk Hee Jordan, Noémie Goudal, and Pivnik. The panel is moderated by Stefanie Hessler, who's the director of the Swiss Institute in New York, which is an organization that's really reconsidering its role from within, building outwards, highlighting the process, highlighting artists who are addressing ecological concerns in their practices. There'll be time for questions at the end of the panel, but please first of all join me in giving our speakers a very warm round of applause and enjoy the conversation.
Thank you, Emily and Jess and everybody at Art Basel for having us, and also Noémie, Duk Hee, and Lee. Thank you so much for joining in this conversation with me today. We're, as you know, in Florida, where, of course, climate change is very palpable already today, and where in the next century, sea levels can rise anything between 1 and 4 feet. Climate change here is also very much connected to the housing crisis. And so I think it's really important to discuss not only questions of climate and climate change, but also the social inequities and the social intersections of climate and the climate crisis. And I'm very happy to be here with three artists today whose work is really dealing with these questions, exploring these questions, and also using narrative and storytelling through different lenses to bring attention to these issues. And I will just say a couple of words about each of you as well without going too deep into the introductions, because I think we'll learn more about you and your work very soon. So Pivnik is a Miami-based artist with a degree in sculpture and also a concentration in nature, culture, and sustainability studies. And you're also self-taught biologist and ecologist. And Lee has been working a lot, taking inspiration from living ecosystems and the relations with mutualistic relationships between humans and non-humans. And you've been working in a very collaborative manner as well with humans and non-humans through the Institute of Queer Ecology, a collaborative organism that Lee co-founded in 2017. And so I'm really excited to be speaking with you and to learn more about your practice as an artist, but also as a collaborator and as an organizer as well. Noémie Goudal, who is sitting next to me, her practice exists at the intersection of art, anthropology, ecology, and environmentalism. Noémie has work at the fair, at a gallery, and your work is also very much about perception, the way that we perceive nature and the way that photography as a medium can help us perceive nature, but also introducing a twist to kind of shift our perception of the thing that we might call nature. And Duk Hee Jordan is an artist and many other things as well, a chef, a diver, and Duk Hee currently has an incredible exhibition up at the Basel called "I Will Always Weather with You," which is an environment inviting viewers to step into the environment and to experience air, land, wind together in this kind of immersive, time-based installation, also involving more than human creatures of different types, both natural and artificial. And with those introductions, I would actually like to hand it over to Duk Hee and ask you to tell us more about your exhibition and the work. Maybe starting with this one, with Ziggy and the Starfish.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure. I'm here since like a while now. I feel like I'm a real Miami Beach girl, but even I haven't seen the beach just once. Yesterday, when I arrived at the hotel and I looked out of the window, was wow, amazing. Yeah, but I'm very much related to the ocean, especially under the current, and the work you see here is now at the TBA in Madrid to see, and it's called Ziggy and the Starfish. It's talks about like yeah, the adaptation of the ocean and of the inhabitants, but also like I used as the counterpart. Was very much inspired by David Bowie, who came with Ziggy Stardust, who came as a Martian down to Earth to rescue manhood from being like having too much party, too much sex and everything. So this was like when I also came in this field like where I got really drawn into nudie branches, because they basically also looked like David Bowie itself, and also the way how they made and to what they are capable is much beyond our own fantasy or what they can do. Like there's like how they made is basically they're hermaphrodites, and they are like having both sexual organs, and then both of them, they grow a penis out of their head, and it's called like penis dancing, fencing, party, whatever. And then the first one who got stuck by the penis has to bring the babies. Sorry. So I got like really into this whole stories, and then I made this film about it. And there's also like a documentary where I interviewed scientists and I hung out with them. I went with a geologist around this area because this area is very special. It's in the it's Baltic. No, it's where my parents live. In the Basque area in northern Spain, and this was basically where the last asteroid hit Earth, and then like the last extinction basically happened. And you can walk from 65 million years back into 230 years in time within like 30 kilometers, which I thought this is really fascinating. And you see in every stripe of the stones, you see iridium, where you see the layers, how basically Earth was erased at that time. Mm. Yeah.
You want to do you want to click through, or while you talk?
Yeah, this is just like another like installation view, and it's a wave basically where you can hang out and you can immerse by the sea creatures, and also there's a reference to the fish nets, and the wave is it's like. I did it in many different kind of forms, but this was like the latest installation form. Yeah, and this is La Grande Bouffe. It's a still piece, and I filmed, or I hung out with the how you call it, bark beetle, which destroys the trees especially like in the European part. And so I filmed all the insects and all the little creatures in this troubled area in Sweden, and I decided to make this kind of like really big installation part where I served them a feast of like the trees which got damaged. So I basically had to debug them, I had to clean them, and I cut them open, and I put them back into the ecosystem so that the dead wood is going back into the circle of life. And the idea was to make a spa for the insects and for the animals who live there. And then I used this this installation as a set design where I basically filmed over 2 years the entire circle of the insects and all the fellows who run around, and then it became also like a film of like a very like microscopic view in their life, where they eat each other, have sex, hang out, and it's like a circle of life basically. And here are like the lavas, they like so the film is like is now to seen nowhere. But we won like a film prize recently with it, and it will be shown in Frankfurt next time. Yeah, and this are like other film stills, and this is basically the installation. So it's like from the drone footage. It's very big, and it was a lot of like heavy duty work to bring all the dead wood back into this area because we couldn't carry the tree logs back into it. So we were like 10 or 12 people like carrying all the logs back into it. And then this is a piece I was inspired by the pattern, what they do when they eat basically the trees, and they have this beautiful pattern. Yeah, and this is now we come to the point. This is installation view from I Will Always Weather With You, where one can enter the space and you walk basically on clouds on the stratosphere in the atmosphere of which you normally can't reach. And the idea was that to create an infinity room with no hard edges, so you basically lose yourself also in this illusion of like an open space. And now the slide is gone, but
yeah, thank you. I mean, if you haven't already seen the installation at the Bas, please go and see it. It's incredible. What I love about your work is that you really reverse our perspective and perception. So at the Bas, we enter a weather system which is changing very fast in more than real time. As you as a viewer are in there, the reflections reflect yourself back and, throw yourself and your own positionality back at you. With Bragfesten, you pay so much attention to this tiny beetle and the sounds of the beetle eating and masticating and, enjoying and being involved in this grand bouffe that the film title is inspired by is incredible. And then with Ziggy and the starfish too, this kind of these shots of underwater creatures caressing one another, interacting one another, and you laid this soundtrack from vintage erotic movies under the film. So when we look at it from a human perspective, it also feels very sensual and sexual. And I love how you, by shifting the perspective, really draw out all of these kinds of details and features that we don't normally pay attention to, especially with microscopic organisms or with those organisms that are so very different in body and, for example, from ourselves. And I think this is really one of the things that art can do, especially in the light of climate change or other sorts of crises, is to reverse or to change our position and our perspective and make us see things, make us perceive things differently. Maybe this is a good segue to you, Noémie, because this is also what you very much do in your work, working through the medium of photography, but also playing with our perception and sort of making us question the way that we perceive and see. And I would love to hear more about that aspect in your work and how you use that to speak, especially about climate paleontology.
Yeah.
And I'll hand this to you for when you're ready.
Thank you. So in the last years, I've been looking at, so I make a lot of researchers for each of my projects, and in the last years, I've been looking at what we call paleoclimatology, which is the study of ancient climates. And for me, it was amazing to read and to talk to scientists about that, because they literally studied the stratus of the Earth, and I could see sort of time within the stratus of the Earth. And for me, what I'd like to do is to create analogies between all the researchers that I read and the protocol that I set up for each of my work. So, for example, I could show you first. Oh, here we go. So this is a film called Below the Deep South, which is about 10 minutes long. But I use here what we call the optical cone, where what I did is I set up 10 layers of paper. So the first one is very near the camera. The second one is 1 meter out. The third one a bit further down, etc., etc. And then, so I make the first layer burn, and then the second, and then the third, and that's how I kind of create a sort of really a depth through the landscape. And I was really interested here in looking at how so it's a very short extract, but anyway, I was really interested here in looking at the fire as has a double role for me because it really destructs every backdrop, and it's a real destructor, but it's also a revealer because it helps to reveal the landscape, the backdrop that is after, and all this film was inspired by some research that I made on a team of scientists who went to Antarctica on an expedition, and they found a mine of coal at the bottom of Antarctica below the ice. And it was, for me, it was really fascinating to see of all the layering of the Earth and how, you can really have below, and then you can see so much of, the deep time below the Earth. And below the deep south is so maybe I'll talk about the next one afterwards, because that explained a bit the process. So again, in this, in all of my series, really, the process of making an effort to create the work, to build the work, is really important, because it's really like a performance, and it's something that I could show in, I could do in 2 minutes on Photoshop. But for me, it's really important to feel that we're still alive to build things, and and for me, the effort is really shown in the pictures at the end, because the final result, this is a making of, so it's how we make this series. So this is part of the making of the series Phoenix, which is a series of about 10 images. So what we've done here is, so I was telling earlier that I was making analogies between scientific sort of discovery and the way, a protocol that I create. So here I wanted to see how I can deconstruct and reconstruct a landscape, so in live. So I was in the palm grove area all night, and I was photographing a place. Then I had my printer, very large printer, in the truck, and I was printing those gigantic images and cropping them and creating a sort of dislocation and recomposing the landscape on live. And I was rephotographing then. So what you can see is the back, which is real, and then the photograph, and a sort of an intertwinement between the real landscape and the photograph. And then I'll show you the final image. And as I said, for me, in all the works, you can see the wires, you can see the tape, you can see the clips, and it's, for me, it's really showing the fragility of the construction, and somehow our fragility towards the landscape, and towards how it's also linked to the memory of a landscape, and how what we remember of a landscape, and how this is also very fragile, because what you remember and interpret a landscape is obviously very different to someone else's interpretation of a landscape. And I've been looking for years and years. Before this project, I've been looking at history of science, which was for me very important as well, like from the antiquity until now, how you perceive, for example, the same mountain, the same ocean, how you perceive it through very different angle, depending on the social, the religious, and the scientific context of the time. So in this project, they were all deconstructed differently, and throughout the series, I deconstructed more and more and more. The last one is extremely even more weaved. This is a performance that I've created, which was shown in various places in museum as well as theater. So in this particular project, I love working in a very different context, the theater world, with an audience that is sitting there for 1 hour looking at this performance. It was we had those 3 screens, and it was for 1 hour we had the music, the sound was all around, and for 1 hour we had those backdrops, those landscape that were in a constant flux of a transformation, like it was a sort of almost like a sort of meditative process. And then at the end, we had this performer who is called Chloe Muglia, whose work is absolutely amazing. She hangs herself. She calls herself a suspensive. That she almost invented her own practice, and she hangs herself very, very slowly. And she's like rediscovering matter and rediscovering all the envelope, that is, around us. And her work is so. When I worked on this performance, I wanted, because it's about paleoclimatology, it's about studying the past in order to apprehend the future climates. And we wanted to have, in this performance, a very acute sense of present. And for us, the best way was to work with Chloe Muglia, whose work is incredible. And so it's so intense, because you have to look at her. You have to... her work is hard to describe with words, but I would really encourage you to look at it. That was it was shot at the Turbine Hall last summer at the Tate Modern in London, and it was for me it was really interesting to work on a setup that was also it was an installation, but it was you had to go through the whole Turbine Hall at night, which is obviously in gigantic space, and then you would really sit in it's so enormous that it was the perfect setting for us for this performance. I must say it was an absolutely amazing week to show it there, and
yeah, I think that's so, and I would love to come back to this too, because I think in both Duk Hee and your work, there's sort of always the presence of the human is still really there. You insert this person who is doing a performance, and in your exhibition, you as a visitor step into the weather, and we're always in the weather, but you kind of amplify that sensation. And especially with the piece with the performer that you're describing, you're exploring deep time, and you're exploring the past of the climate, but nonetheless also our human relationship to that past, and also to how we affect the future climate through this notion of performance and the presence of the body of the performer as well as the live audience, amplifying that sort of relationship and the crux of climate change that we're discussing today.
Yeah, deep time is a notion that is really really important for me, because the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. We know that now, but it's been moving, in the constant flux, like so slowly, so long, and onto millions of years, and our time, our human time, is so fast, and we go on, it counts on minutes and hours, and then suddenly, what is going on now? That the planet is starting to take the pace, the rhythm of our time, the human time. It goes so fast. The changes are going so fast. So, and I think that's probably the scientists I talk to. For them, it's one of the biggest challenge, the paleoclimatologists, because they studied everything that happened before. So they kind of know the climate has obviously changed, drastically, but on a rhythm that is so slow. And now they can do a lot of models, and they can predict whatever how whatever they can, but the notion of the time and the rhythm, the fast rhythm of the human time is so tricky for them, and that's the one key that they don't have. So like for me, having those, I've used it in my work quite a lot actually, having those, working on two different temporalities. So for example, I use a lot of photography and videos together, so I project, and that's in anima as well, the performance as well, where we have an image and then we project, I projected the film, the exact same image. So it's again a sort of optical illusion, and then it slowly moves, and then suddenly you have the image, and then you have the projection, and then you don't know in which temporality you are. So that's how I created those.
One of the challenges, of course, that you're describing when speaking with scientists is how to create meaning and looking towards the past, creating data, creating meaning out of data. And here we are looking at a map, which is also a tool for meaning making and for finding our own position and for thinking about past and future. And Lee, with that, I would love to hand over to you. And if you could tell us more about this map and also your work.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Lee here. We were talking in advance of this panel about the themes kind of already being brought up, deep time, place here. And in kind of a belated land acknowledgement midway through panel, I'd like to kind of ground us in this very disorienting map, because Miami is a disorienting place. I heard a great quote earlier in like the Nova section of a guy that just goes, "Bro, Miami's like a weird vibe." And it was like spot on, because it is. We get 70% of our power from a nuclear plant that is filled with crocodiles in the cooling canals here. It is a beautiful and strange city with a deeper history than we usually think about. And so we were talking about the impacts, the immediate impacts we're seeing right now in the city with climate change, but also climate gentrification, and how a lot of that is centered on these areas of high elevation in Florida being at most like 19 feet in South Florida. But 19 feet in talking about a time scale of like 1 to 4 feet of sea level rise makes a big difference. And a lot of those neighborhoods are experiencing big pressures from developers right now. And a lot of that is tied to the arts. The arts and gentrification have a entangled and rough history here. And so we were talking about trying to find a way to show a map of that. The maps are all, they do different GIS data. They're all doing different things. They're all, even with the sciences and satellite data, they can be just as confusing and disorienting. But so I had this drawing that I figured would be a nice way to bring this in. And my studio, for context, is like, we're right now, if the kind of closest to the bottom is north, you can see the beach on the left. Those might be the bridges you found yourself on for a couple hours a day. And then down way up at the top is kind of in the direction of my studio, which is in a park called Deering Estate, which is one of the few places in Miami where you can see the kind of like larger, like more than 10,000 year history of the place. There's like the 100-year history of the park and the estate that the Deering family run and that has become an artist residency. There's the 1,000-year history of the Tequesta people that had a village on the land. And then there's a 10,000-year history of a sinkhole on the site that was excavated in the 80s and revealed all kinds of different California condors and jaguars, but also and mammoths, but a fire that was radiocarbon dated and really reset the human habitation timeline for South Florida, which was thought to be about 6,000 years, set it back to like almost about 11,000. And so a lot of the work that I'll talk about today is directly about kind of creating like a symbiotic life way with the land, creating a relationship of mutualism where the city is no longer what it is today, which is that all of the runoff from this flows into the bay and creates these really toxic ecologies and feral ecologies. We have the most invasive species of any place on the world, and a lot of them are very beautiful, and not their fault that they're here. When I talk about kind of symbiotic lifeways and futurism, a lot of that is rooted and inspired very deeply by just like longer term connections to the land. And so I wanted to thank those ancestors that stewarded the land where my studio is before I was here, and then also still today the present day Miccosukee tribes, the Seminole tribes, and the people that don't go into either federally recognized tribe but share the land here still today. The work I do is all maybe best explained as sculpture and social practice. I do like Boyce's social sculpture framework as a way to think about the work. Sometimes it's very object-based. I really enjoy working in ceramics. This is a series of objects from earlier this year called crabgrass that were meant to feel right in between the land and the water. They kind of started with one ceramic form that was very grass-like, and then evolved throughout the series as maybe mushrooms would sprout off of them as a butterfly would land on them. The imagery is very drawn from both the land and the sea here. But before that, I, for years now, have been interested in what I'm calling emergent animal architecture, which is really looking at, as we talk about different frameworks to inhabit this place that is changing rapidly and needs different frameworks. I am super interested in finding guidance from our non-human community. The termite mound was the first thing I explored in this kind of line of animal architecture, because termite mounds which are not the same termites we have here. The termites we have here just move right into our homes. But the termite mounds in other continents will have these like kind of emergent architectural properties where the core of them is a fungus garden where the termites are cultivating a food source, and then that's off-gassing CO2, which gets pumped out ambiently through these kind of vent towers. And so in this piece, I was borrowing that architecture as a way to do a video installation. And so as you would walk around the piece, you would get just a glimpse into this kind of alien world by looking into the vent towers, which every now and then would also pump out smoke through a fog machine in the center of the work, and it has a sound system in it. And so between the lights and the sound and the fog, it feels almost like a club, or like walking past a club as the door's closing and you're trying to like get a glimpse in. That like experience of looking at the biodiverse world around us to find different both visual metaphors and like also like architectural principles to incorporate into building then grows here into a series of works that I started as part of this kind of expanded social sculpture project called Symbiotic House, which has been an ongoing project for the past 2 years. But the perspective end goal of it is to think about how to continue inhabiting a place as precarious as Florida, where every year we're told that this might be just the year that the whole insurance market collapses here. For scale, for like, if for any of you are coming from out of town, as I expect some of you might be, the hurricane we had last year, Hurricane Ian, that hit the West Coast and really destroyed a lot of the communities there, was, in terms of like global insurance losses, was half of all global insurance losses last year, was this one storm hitting Florida. And so this is why we're having these issues of essentially what will be well before the waters rise in Florida will have a very boring financial death. Really thinking about strategies to find alternatives to just like the conventional security of being a person in Florida. I'm a 5th generation South Floridian, and for every generation before me, they would just, you know, do the American dream of putting your assets into the home, and your home then you retire with one day. I think that in the timeline that I'm inhabiting now, where a 30-year mortgage is on a crash course with a 30-year sea level projection rise for this place, those aren't conventional strategies we can use anymore. And so while the core of my work is interested in biodiversity and sculpture, a lot of just living and working as an artist in Miami, I don't think I can ignore these themes. And so now I've kind of evolved from the termites to find a local kin here in the mangroves, which are our super species here on the coasts. They're, of course, blocking storm surge. They're nurseries for so many different species of fish that start their lives in these coastal forests. They're heavily protected here. The one image on the left here, where you can see kind of like 2 of these trees coming together, is from a piece that I grew both of these from seeds for about 5 years to get the object, to get the corpse of it. And it only passed away because I repotted it too aggressively. And so the medium then is an epoxy resin that like starts to encase it and protect it. And the kind of amber-colored windows you're seeing throughout the works is kind of like a proto-amber. It's a tree resin that, if it was fossilized, would be amber, but right now is in a state that comes from like a byproduct of turpentine production. And so as pine forests are cut down for this, this ends up at the very end of the kind of like product pipeline to make turpentine. And it has a few uses right now, but really you can get a lot of it for cheap. And so I've been melting it down in my studio and using it almost like a stained glass. And the sculpture work all like kind of has been culminating now in a process of 3D modeling and kind of these like series of concept art images for the proposal of like what will be the first constructed symbiotic house. Which is next year. I'm working now to really retrofit an existing tiny South Beach studio apartment. And so with the tongue-in-cheek idea that if the studio apartment, you know, there's no really walls between your bedroom and your living room, the whole thing I'm calling the living room as the artwork. And it's rendered in the renderings I'll show as kind of a big treehouse, but it's based on a real apartment that's maybe about 5 blocks south of here. That is just in like a very conventional like apartment complex, but I've removed it from that as part of a digital architecture show called the Metacity Biennial that Hans-Ulrich Obrist curated with Venus Lau in Shanghai this year. So the renderings and images you're seeing are from this, but they're also kind of my approach to like an architectural rendering that still like feels as freeform as the sculpture practice. I don't want to be an architect at the end of the day. I'm just interested in dwelling as a medium. And so the core idea behind the living room, real quick, is that it converts the apartment into an aquaponics filtration studio. And so both a place where you're growing your food, but also cleaning polluted water. One of our main water quality issues here in Florida spawns from agricultural runoff, where excess fertilizer ends up in the waterways, creates these big algae blooms, which then suffocate out the ecosystems. The core issue, though, is from a excessive input of nutrients into a nutrient-poor ecosystem. And so we're not dealing with heavy metal pollution in some cases by remediation. We're dealing with something that we're putting into the system to get more growth out of. And so I see it as a real opportunity to see a problem as a solution and to try to build in a system of recapturing those excess nutrients into a kind of 2-story vertical farm system here. And I'm going to show just one video at the end of this that gives you a quick 45 seconds of fly through of the space. And then we'll talk about it. Let's see if that plays. Yeah, nice. Ooh, thank you for the lights.
Great soundtrack.
As that was happening, I was like, this does not have an audio component. Thought you all took the liberty there for a second, and it sounded pretty good. But yeah, on that, I think I don't want to talk too much about the work and what we could just have as a conversation together.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you also for bringing the questions of the financialization of the current crisis, the insurance market, real estate, as well as ecosystems and biodiversity together, and grounding us in this kind of very connected space.
They're not always sexy in an art practice to talk about, but as an artist living and working in the place, it's hard not to.
And there are also, of course, all of these utopian ideas from the 1960s and 70s of artists like Hans Haake, for example, or the Harrisons, who've attempted to create these kind of alternative ecosystems or to clean up water of rivers and so on. And I appreciate how you're taking that into the 21st century. And maybe on this notion of, finding solutions or working partially also in a design practice, I would love to hear from you, Duk Hee, about your thoughts on especially questions of technology and using some of these technological kind of attempts to remediate the current situation that we're in. And I'm thinking specifically about the little critters that are moving around in your exhibition and your thoughts of, or how those critters came to be, and the title as well.
Yeah, they're called artificial stupidity, and they are like the counterpart of artificial intelligence. And I also have to mention I'm a professor for media arts. So the students are very drawn into the whole high-end technology and data algorithm and all these, but I am a professor for that, but I'm not teaching them the technology part, because I think it's very important to learn and to understand like the other part of the ecological surroundings where we are. And so I'm really fascinated by our surroundings and how things work together and how they interact. That what we are looking at it as technology as itself comes from nature, and so we have to embrace that. And what we are creating in terms of AI and machine learning vacuum cleaners, refrigerator to keep our food alive, which is basically not alive. It's these things where I try to turn it upside down, and so I started going into the artificial stupidity, because I think stupidity is very important to understand how stupid we are, and what we create in terms of the storage of data we're putting up into the air. Like, so we know, like, the clouds as a storage is always like predicts like something bad. So if the sky is very cloudy, you know there's like a shit weather coming ahead. And so this is something I'm really like trying to make that like visible, but in a sense of like a humorous way, of like not like pointing down, say, okay, this is all shit and it's all like doomsday, but it's like basically also like to see and to change and to have the adaptation of our beings. And like the show I'm having now at the Basel is like the first time that I put the human so much into the center, as we see ourselves so much as a reflection. But like if you look up from everything is like in the bird's perspective, seeing it as like from the future into the past, when we look down and we walk on the clouds, but it's also like our own like sense of in this surrounding. And normally my work is so much not focused on the human. So this is like really like the first time, because we are all sitting in the same boat. So it's always like weathering with you, like dancing in turbulence times, and like trying to understand where we are. And if we would like to change things, I mean, we definitely could, but we have to do an effort in order to do so. And that's why also like the robots, they are really, if you look at it, they behave really weird. The materials are used materials. They are not like new materials. So I always like dig around and look, maybe this could be an eye, and then they start to come alive. And this is also like the charm of these bots. They are like not my cobots, like my family. It's a big family now. And yeah, they're like not this brand new beings. Like they really like they have a life, and they are surrounded. And so this is also like something, but it's a different topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the reversal of perspective, but also the introduction of humor is so important in shifting our perspective and suggesting that there are things that we can do if we want to do things about it. For me, also at Swiss Institute, the institution that I run in New York, we're inviting at the moment artists into conversations and inviting them to interfere in the processes of the institution, and what I think of as environmental institutional critique, where the artist Jenna Sotela, for example, was inspired by a figure from the Muppet universe from Fraggle Rock. There's this figure who's a trash pile, this matronly figure called Marjorie. And because everything is deposited in Marjorie, all the trash and food scraps and whatnot, she has access to all information, so she's also an oracle. And so Jenna created a sculpture for us that we use as a staff to deposit our food scraps. And there are thousands of worms living inside this compost, and the electrochemical processes of the worms eating and digesting and creating the compost produce heat that we have connected to an earth battery that powers a speaker, which is transmitting oracle messages through the building. So it's an artwork that, proposes a small sort of solution to, waste and waste management. It interferes in the very real workings of the institution, and it introduces humor, it shifts our perspective, but it also isn't making any grand claim to one singular solution that might help us, alleviate the situation, which obviously we all know we need to change. But to me, this question of process is so important, of how, to move away from a final solution that may work for one specific situation, but to focus much more on ways of thinking and ways of doing and the process, because none of what we do, of course, we're all still contributing to climate change. None of what we do is perfect by any means, but nonetheless we need to start somewhere. And I think this kind of messiness, or this place from where we must start, can be productive in some ways. At least working with artists and thinking together with artists on finding better futures.
The example you just gave of the worm oracle makes me think that, like, even if it's a small gesture, it's a gesture that I'm hoping to do in my work too, which is that we're never going to get to the kind of like climate action and that we need, which is like basically just from shifting governments and industries that like need public pressure, if the public pressure isn't there. And the public pressure won't be there, I think, until we're living our climate politics, until like these like futures we want to see can be felt and experienced and like embodied on a day-to-day routine in like strange ways like this, in ways that like are surprising and like more interesting than going about it as business as usual. And so it really, I came full circle in the like process of like, what can I do as an artist? You start with the individual action, then you learn that carbon footprints are all just like BP propaganda tools. And then you say, well, I'll wait for the bigger systems to change. And they haven't. And years have passed still. And so I'm back to like actually not feeling that being an individual is a point of being a fool and feeling like you take it all onto yourself, but that you can like actually start to see the ripple effects, and that they all have to start somewhere, and that's not always just changing your light bulbs because BP said to, but really changing your habits in a way that can have an artistic opportunity to really just think about, dwelling again as this action.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes.
Will be closing in 10 minutes.
10 minutes. If any of you have questions, now is a good time to think about them. We'll be taking questions very soon. I have one more question for you, Noémie. I would love to know how you're working with people who study deep time and to really think about time frames that go beyond human time, or beyond the lifespan of any human individual, obviously, but also of humanity, how that has changed your perspective and maybe also your practice.
Yeah, I think for me, gosh, there are many. For me, deep time is really, first of all, it's what we can learn about our world, so about deep time, is within the stratus of the Earth. So for me, first of all, this was this idea that that time and space are completely embedded. So I think for me that was really something really important. And something also I wanted to add, what we talked about earlier, is I think what really helped me with all those researchers on paleoclimatology is to see the world in a much global, much larger way. It's like trying to see it as it's not with us, necessarily within it, but in a much, we are so tiny and we are so like a second of it, and looking at it in a much, I think it helps to make us a lot more humble about our position, and that for me that really helped me, looking at those drops of water that you can find in rocks that are 300 million years old, and that how when you can find them there on this particular rock, it was actually back 300 million years ago. It was, for example, you find it in Brittany in France, and actually it was back then the same rock was located on the equator near Texas, for example. That kind of when you talk to scientists, they're living with this kind of huge vertigo of, and for me that's fascinating also to see how the way they perceive the world is in this constant movement. We have our borders, we have our continents, everything is so set, but for them everything is in a dance, in a choreography, in a movement. And to me this was a huge source of inspiration. and also one other thing that I've studied, but it was more when I looked at the history of science, was the Gaia theory from that James Lovelock was talked about, of how we used to from the 17th century with the taxonomy, we used to live in the scientists used to see everything through, you know, putting things in boxes. So, you know, putting the elements, putting all the animals and the plants and even the rocks and the mountains into boxes in order to analyze them. And I think that now what James Lovelock was suggesting in the 70s with his Gaia theory was really trying to see how we can look at the world by looking at the interconnection of elements, you know, the symbiosis, the interconnection. And I feel that the scientists now are more and more looking in that direction, and more instead of, you know, separating everything. It's like, it's, you know, this learning about, you know, blending and yeah, the result of the symbiosis. And I think that's, for me also, that was a very important yeah, a very huge source of inspiration for the creation of all those works.
I mean, you also speak to different kind of epistemologies from which we can learn, one of them being inspired by different time frames. I'm also thinking that science is, of course, one way of meaning making, art is another one, but then there are also many indigenous epistemologies and cosmogonies which, you know, are or have been attempted to be eradicated, but are also still, you know, very much here, and in many cases thriving, and there's a lot of kind of movements for them to come back. And I think the kind of diversity of different ways of knowing and of knowledge creation is also so incredibly important if we want to somewhat tackle this climate crisis that we find ourselves in.
It's interesting to say that, you say that, because it's I'm starting to research on this new big corpus on the invisible energies and what we call geobiology, which is the study of...
The show is now closing. Thank you for visiting Basel.
Maybe we can take, if there are any urgent questions, maybe we can take those now before we have to run out.
I wanted to thank you so much for this very stimulating conversation. I wanted to pick up on a comment that Noémie just made about this sense of being tiny in comparison to geological timeframes. And perhaps it's a question around scales. And I guess all of you using a bit this kind of visual motifs of mise en abîme, so this idea of reflecting something, the using of mirrors, using a bit illusion, augmented reality. And I was just wondering if any of you wanted to reflect on this idea of use of scales to consider more this question of unfathomable timelines.
My quick thought on that is that I have found a lot more hope, or just like less just like abysmal climate like anxiety, really focusing on one specific place. That the old truism, think local or act local, think global, is like really like I find that in a lot of the work that I've been doing with the Institute of Queer Ecology, which is kind of like fed into and morphed this body of work I'm showing today. A lot of it was collaboration with people largely networked across the internet, people maybe that I haven't met in person, even now after working with them for years, all working with different localities and different themes, and there's some overlap, but it a lot of it then is more based on like raising awareness and having a conversation, and to really get engaged in like the details of bioremediation or like climate adaptation. You really need to be working, I think, with the hard science of a place, and that those scales of deep time, but also just of like the scale of like a global issue that we're discussing and what the role of one person can be. I have found locality and being just shrinking down to what you're looking at to be a really helpful tool.
Thank you. I think there was one more question here. There's a microphone coming.
So since every action has a consequence, and thinking specifically with art, the materials you use or the transportation it takes to get an installation somewhere, what is the benefit you look for to offset that cost, or the reward that makes that cost worthwhile for you?
I mean, I can say from an institutional point of view, we've done our carbon audits for the last 3 years, and we make decisions very, specifically to each situation about the benefit of bringing an artwork, whether we can use sea freight over air freight. But we also ask artists to help us identify organizations that work to remediate the impact of climate change for any emissions that we cannot avoid. So and those are not offsets. We don't want to buy into that industry, but they're strategic climate funds to really look towards organizations and individuals who can have an impact on ecosystems, but also local communities. But it is always a very specific conversation, and thinking about cost benefit of each decision that we make very actively. Great. Well, thank you so much for coming, for your questions, and to the three of you for sharing your incredible work with us. And thank you again to Emily, Jess, and Art Basel for having us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.